So, he says, if they were to hear about themselves from you, they couldn't say the Lord is lying. To hear you speaking about oneself is to know oneself. This is an important theme in Augustine. It'll be picked up again in John Calvin, right at the beginning of the Institutes of the Christian Religion. To know oneself, you have to know God. But to know God, you have to know yourself. You have to find the source in yourself for that yearning for God. And so you begin the process of seeking God by looking within yourself. But on the other hand, you are opaque to yourself. You're not going to be able to understand yourself. And in fact, the key, the essence of you, really consists in your relation to God. So you can't understand even the core of what is you without understanding something about God. From ancient times, it's been an important maxim. Know thyself. That's the oracle at Delphi and what was written over the top. Know thyself. For Augustine, that becomes something like, well, yes, know yourself and know about your dependence on God. The fact that your essence consists in your relationship with God. And so knowing God is vital to knowing oneself. But when you try to know yourself, you may know that, but can you know a lot of other things about yourself? You are largely opaque to yourself. There's a huge amount you cannot know. So, he says, I turn toward myself and I ask, who are you? I reply, a man. I see in myself a body and a soul, one external, the other internal. Which of these should I have questioned about my God, for whom I had already searched through the physical order of things from earth to heaven, as far as I could send the rays of my eyes as messengers? What is inward is superior. There is an important point here. He is an internalist. He is saying what really matters is what's going on in here, not what's going on with the body. It's a question of what's happening in my mind, in my soul, much more than it is the body. Everybody wants to be happy. Here he is echoing Aristotle. Happiness, Aristotle says, is the final end, the thing that is always sought for its own sake, never for the sake of something else. Augustine isn't going quite so far, but he is saying that we all want to be happy. That seems like a universal human trait. We would all like to be happy. But what does happiness consist in? What do we do about it? As Aristotle says, well, here people have many opinions. And indeed they do. So what is true happiness? Before we even get to the question of what it is, how do we seek it? We have that problem of memory already, which is to say, surely I must already in some sense know what happiness is if I'm to seek it. It's like, if I'm looking for something that I've lost, I must already in some sense remember or remember it so that I can recognize it when I find it. Well, if I've lost something in my mind, if I've forgotten something, well, what's involved in me trying to remember it, trying to call it back into mind? It must in some sense be in my memory and yet not be in my memory. I must have some knowledge of it to know what I'm looking for and to recognize it when I find it. Well, here similarly, mustn't we already know what happiness is so that we can recognize it when we find it? How would we even know we were happy unless we already recognized happiness? He says, we have a desire for it, of course, but how? I don't know. There's another sense in which a person who has it is happy, and there are some who are happy in hopes of becoming so. Here I think it's just a throwaway observation almost in Augustine, but I think it's a really good point. Is happiness a state? Like, I'm thinking of the end of a video game where at the end, you win, you beat the game, and there's this kind of grand chord, and there you are in that state of achievement. Or is it more like a process? Is it more like a happy life is one where you're in the flow and experiencing happiness as you go? It's not a static state you achieve. It's instead something that, you climb toward, and it's somehow in the climbing that the happiness consists. Now, what is the happy life? That's a crucial question. He says, there is a delight that's not given to the wicked. That's the authentic happy life, to set one's joy on you, that is to say, on God, grounded in you and caused by you. That's the real thing. There is no other. This is something that harks back to his conversation about the ordo amoris, about the proper order of affections. People care about all sorts of things and identify all sorts of things with a happy life. Sometimes it's pleasure, sometimes prosperity, sometimes in friends, sometimes in achievement or accomplishment, or well, a wide variety of other things, sometimes in the approval or honor of other people. But, he says, none of those things is true happiness. We have to realize what is most deserving of our desire, what is most deserving of our admiration and praise and attention and striving. And the answer to that is God. It is God and a relationship with God that is of a value far higher than the value of pleasure or prosperity or any of those other things. So he says, God, most of all, merits our praise, merits worship even. What is the happy life? Here he gives us the closest thing we have to a definition in Augustine. The happy life is joy based on the truth. Joy based on the truth. This joy is grounded in you, O God, who are the truth, my illumination, the salvation of my face, my God. This happy life everyone desires. Joy in the truth everyone wants. And here he says something very nice. There are people who want to deceive others, but nobody wants to be deceived. Everybody prefers the truth. Maybe in telling a lie, they put something else over the truth. Nevertheless, none of us really want to be lied to. We want to know the truth. The truth is something valued by everyone. So the happy life must be founded in the truth. But what is the truth? In the end, God is the truth. You might think that Augustine himself would be full of joy, the joy of the truth, the joy of that kind of relationship with God. But he admits that he isn't. He says, for the present, because I'm not full of you, I'm a burden to myself. There's a struggle between the joys over which I should be weeping and regrets at matters over which I ought to be rejoicing. Which side has the victory? I don't know. So, I don't know to what extent I have strength of will. I don't know to what extent I'm enjoying the right things. I'm seeking after the right things. I don't know, in other words, whether my own loves, my own affections are ordered in the proper way. I try. I'd like to think they are. But he says, I admit, at this point, I don't have complete communion with God. I don't have the fullest relationship with God that I possibly can. He's saying, I don't know God as well as I hope to know God. And so everything right now is through a glass darkly. Well, that means I'm not full of you. I'm a burden to myself because I don't even know my own strengths. I don't know my own weaknesses. I don't know the extent to which the things that I respond to are actually appropriate to the way they ought to be responded to. It may be that my desires, my emotions, my thoughts are out of sync with reality, are not matching the objective truth. It might be that my reactions to things really are inapt. They are not things that are fitting given the circumstances. I am approving things that don't merit approval. I may be seeking things that do not merit desire. I may be dismissing things that do merit my attention and focus. All of those things, he says, I may be doing that. In fact, I undoubtedly am doing it. And I can't tell the extent to which I'm doing it. Oh, God, set me on fire. You command continence. Grant what you command, and command what you will. So in short, he asks God's help. He says, in the end, I have to throw myself in your mercy and say, I know you want me to resist. I know you want my affections to be well ordered. But please, set me on fire. That is to say, make me consumed with the things that I ought to desire. Make my desires, my emotions, my thoughts well ordered and directed toward you. You command self-control. Grant that I have that self-control. Now remember earlier he said, I used to pray, yes, grant me continence, but not yet. Now that's turned around. Grant me continence. You command it. Grant what you command and command what you will. In your eyes, Augustine says, I've become a problem to myself. That is my sickness. Life is an immense jungle full of traps and dangers. And indeed, in that jungle, Augustine says, I don't know where many of those traps and dangers lie. I don't know myself very well at all. Much about me, not just my memory, or the extent to which my responses to the world are appropriate and fitting responses to that world, but also the sense in which, well, gosh, who am I really? What am I deep down? That's something that is hidden even from me. I don't know why I do the things I do. I don't know my own strength of will. I don't know when I'm successfully reflecting God's will and when I'm not. But, he says, I do know God better than I know myself, and that at least is some kind of guide for me. God commands that we love our neighbors as ourselves. If I do a kindness for my neighbor, am I doing it out of love? Or am I doing it to be thought well of, to gain the approval of the neighbor or of various other onlookers? Am I really doing good for the sake of good? Or am I virtue signaling, trying to appear good? I don't know. Augustine says, I don't know. I don't know when I'm actually acting virtuously and when I'm signaling virtue for the sake of others. I don't know when I'm successfully doing what God asks me to do and when I'm failing and substituting some kind of cheap simulation. How, if I don't know God already, can I pursue a knowledge of God? And how is it possible for me to have any idea what even constitutes climbing those stairs out of the cave, heading in the right direction? How would I know unless I already know where I'm going? He says in some sense it's an insoluble problem. However, God provided a solution. How is it possible? God sent a mediator into the world. That mediator had to be someone close to God. It had to be someone who could enable us to have some idea of what God is, of who God is, of what God is like, of what it would be like to seek after God. And yet, that being, that mediator, also had to be enough like us, that could be communicated to us in ways we could understand. He says a mediator between God and the human race ought to have something in common with God and something in common with humanity. If the mediator were in both aspects like humanity, he'd be far distant from God. If he were in both aspects like God, he'd be far distant from humanity and so be no mediator. Well, this mediator would have to be then part God, part man, or really, in the end, fully God and fully man. The true mediator, he says, you showed to humanity in your secret mercy. In Christ, we had the Word, which was made flesh and dwelt among us. And the Word, being God, gives us some idea of what God is, of what direction to go to seek greater knowledge of and communion with God. But the fact that the Word dwelt among us means that we were actually able to see what direction to go, gave us a direction, told us what the path is toward God. And so I think the point in the end of Book 10 is that Christ was essential to seeking God, not simply some aspect of Christianity that is an optional part of a religion. You can seek God in all sorts of ways. This is just one of them. No, he's saying it's essential. There is no way to explain how we would even go about seeking God unless there were such a mediator. With such a mediator, we can solve the problem. We have some idea of which direction to go, what it is we're seeking. Without such a mediator, we couldn't possibly know. And so, to know God, to know what it is to even seek God, he says, apart from Christ, doesn't even make any sense. We would have no idea even how to begin. But Christ gives us a way of tying the human realm and the divine realm together in such a way as to indicate to us how we ought to proceed, how we ought to seek God, and what direction we should take in order to climb the stairs out of the cave toward a greater knowledge of God.